The shovel struck something metallic 6 feet down, and groundskeeper Tom Murphy froze mid-dig, his weathered hands trembling on the wooden handle. 3 days after burying Officer Bill Henderson with full police honors, the freshly turned earth of Salem Memorial Cemetery should have been silent as the grave itself. The rhythmic tapping from below the coffin wasn't possible. Grace Henderson collapsed to her knees beside the open grave, her black funeral dress pooling in the Oregon mud, as Duke, the German shepherd, clawed frantically at the dirt with bloodied paws. The gathered crowd of mourners stepped back in horrified silence, watching crimson streaks stain the polished mahogany casket below. "That's my husband down there," Grace whispered, her voice breaking as she remembered Bill's calloused fingers just 3 mornings ago, brewing her coffee too strong the way she secretly loved. The morning before everything went wrong. "Dig faster!" Police Chief Harrison barked, his command cutting through the autumn air like a blade. How long could a man survive buried alive? And why was Duke the only one who knew? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Salem, Oregon, had always been the kind of place where neighbors still brought casseroles when someone died, and where the morning coffee at Murphy's Diner came with a side of gossip that traveled faster than the town's single fire truck. Nestled in the heart of the Willamette Valley, this community of 175,000 souls prided itself on taking care of its own, especially the families of those who wore the badge. Officer William Bill Henderson had been one of those badges for 32 years, walking the same streets where he'd grown up, protecting the same neighbors who'd watched him graduate from South Salem High. At 58, with just 6 months left until retirement, Bill had the kind of steady presence that made people feel safer just knowing he was on duty. His Korean War veteran father had taught him that duty meant something, that a man's word was his bond, and that service to others was the highest calling. Grace Henderson had fallen in love with that sense of duty 30 years ago when she was a young ICU nurse and Bill was a rookie cop who brought injured stray cats to the animal hospital on his own dime. They'd built a quiet life together in their modest 2-bedroom house on Cherry Avenue, where Grace tended her prized rose garden and Bill fixed everything that broke with the patient hands of a man who understood that some things were worth preserving. The absence of children had been their shared heartache, but they'd poured that parental love into their community and for the past 4 years into Duke. Duke wasn't just Bill's K-9 partner. He was the son they'd never had. The 6-year-old German shepherd with his intelligent amber eyes and black and tan coat had come to them from a rescue situation, bearing the scars of abuse that made him skittish around strangers but fiercely loyal to those he trusted. At 75 pounds of pure muscle and devotion, Duke slept at the foot of their bed every night, his breathing a comforting rhythm that had become the soundtrack of their marriage. Dr. Margaret Stone had been Salem County's medical examiner for 15 years, a position that required her to deliver the kind of news that shattered families like dropped china. At 49, she lived alone in a sterile apartment across town, her ex-husband long gone, and her only son, Danny, dead for 2 years now. The official cause was an overdose in county lockup, but Margaret knew the real killer had been the arrest that put him there. Officer Bill Henderson's arrest. The tight-knit community that surrounded these lives operated on the unspoken understanding that some bonds were sacred. Coffee gatherings at the Henderson home on Sunday mornings, potluck dinners at the fire station, and the annual police picnic where Duke performed his tricks for squealing children were the threads that wove Salem together. But beneath that comfortable fabric, grief and resentment had been quietly festering, waiting for the right moment to tear everything apart. Tuesday, October 15th started like any other autumn day in Salem, with Grace humming softly as she prepared Bill's favorite pot roast, the aroma of carrots and onions filling their cozy kitchen while golden leaves drifted past the window. She'd planned to have dinner ready by 6, knowing Bill would come home tired but satisfied from another day of keeping their community safe. Duke lay sprawled across the kitchen tiles, his tail thumping lazily against the cabinet as Grace occasionally dropped him a piece of carrot, their comfortable domestic routine as predictable as the Oregon rain. At 3:30 p.m., the call came in that would shatter their world. A tip about a meth lab operating out of the old Williamson warehouse on the outskirts of town had Bill and Duke responding to what should have been a routine investigation. The abandoned building had been an eyesore for years, its broken windows and sagging roof a reminder of better economic times. But it was far enough from residential areas that drug operations could go unnoticed for weeks. Bill parked the patrol car 50 yards from the entrance, checking his radio one final time before approaching the structure. Duke's ears were already forward, his nose working the air as chemical scents drifted from the building's interior. Years of partnership had taught Bill to trust his K-9's instincts completely. When Duke alerted, there was always something worth investigating. The warehouse appeared abandoned as they entered through a side door, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space where machinery had once hummed with industrial purpose. Broken glass crunched under Bill's boots, while Duke moved with the practiced silence of a predator, his training taking over as he began methodically searching for traces of illegal substances. The afternoon sun slanted through broken skylights, creating a patchwork of light and shadow that made visibility treacherous. It happened in an instant. The floor beneath Bill's feet, weakened by years of water damage and neglect, gave way with a sound like thunder. One moment he was following Duke's lead toward the rear of the building. The next he was falling 15 feet into the basement below, his head striking concrete with a sickening crack that echoed through the sudden silence. Duke's frantic barking from above seemed to come from another world, as consciousness faded in and out, Bill's vision blurring as warm blood trickled down his forehead. The building's partial collapse followed quickly, support beams shifting as the compromised structure settled, trapping Bill under a pile of debris that pressed against his chest like a slowly tightening vice. His radio had been destroyed in the fall, and his service weapon lay just beyond reach in the settling dust. Above him, Duke's barking grew more desperate, the sound bouncing off the basement walls in a symphony of canine distress that no one else would hear for another 20 minutes. When the Salem Fire Department finally arrived, responding to a neighbor's report of loud crashes from the warehouse district, they found Duke standing guard at the edge of the hole, his amber eyes wild with anxiety as he refused to leave his post. The firefighters declared the building too unstable for immediate rescue operations, concerned that additional collapse could kill anyone attempting to reach the basement. It was a reasonable precaution that would prove tragically unnecessary. Dr. Margaret Stone arrived as county medical examiner, her practiced professionalism masking the surge of recognition when she saw Bill Henderson's name on the incident report. Here was the man who'd arrested her son Danny 2 years ago, the man whose zealous pursuit of drug offenders had ultimately led to her boy's death in county lockup. The opportunity for justice, or perhaps revenge, presented itself with crystalline clarity as she knelt beside Bill's unconscious form in the basement rubble. His pulse was weak but present, his breathing shallow but steady. A severe concussion certainly, possible internal injuries, but nothing immediately fatal. With proper medical attention, Bill Henderson would survive to see another day, to continue his career, to live the full life that her Danny would never have. The decision Margaret made in that moment would haunt Salem for years to come, a choice born from a mother's grief and nurtured by 2 years of bitter resentment. Time of death, 4:47 p.m., she announced to the waiting first responders, her voice steady as she falsified the most important declaration of her career. The lie came easily, wrapped in medical authority that no one would question. Bill Henderson was dead, according to the county's chief medical examiner, and that pronouncement would set in motion a chain of events that would test the very bonds holding Salem's community together. Grace's world ended with a phone call just as she was seasoning the pot roast. Chief Harrison's voice heavy with regret as he delivered news that turned her comfortable kitchen into a mausoleum of abandoned dreams. Duke, meanwhile, had to be physically restrained from the body bag, his desperate whining dismissed as simple grief rather than the urgent warning it truly was. Friday, October 18th. Dawned gray and somber over Salem Memorial Cemetery, the kind of Oregon morning where mist clung to the headstones like ghostly fingers, reluctant to let go of the night. Grace Henderson stood before her bedroom mirror, struggling with the zipper of the black dress she'd bought for their planned anniversary cruise, never imagining she'd wear it to bury her husband instead. Her hand shook as she applied lipstick with the mechanical precision of someone moving through shock, each familiar motion a small defiance against the unreality of the day ahead. The funeral preparations had proceeded with military efficiency, Salem's police department rallying around one of their own with the fierce loyalty that defined small-town law enforcement. Officer Henderson would receive full honors, the flag-draped casket, the 21-gun salute, the haunting notes of taps echoing across the cemetery's rolling hills. Grace had nodded numbly through the arrangements, grateful for the decisions being made around her while her world contracted to the simple act of breathing in and out. Duke had not eaten since Tuesday. The German shepherd lay beside Bill's empty chair at the kitchen table, his amber eyes fixed on the door with an intensity that broke Grace's heart anew each time she looked at him. Neighbors bringing casseroles would whisper about the dog's grief, how animals knew things people couldn't understand, but their well-meaning words felt hollow against the reality of Duke's vigil. He refused walks, ignored treats, and responded to commands with the mechanical obedience of a creature whose spirit had been fractured. Salem Memorial Cemetery's Section C had witnessed countless farewells over its 100-year history, but rarely had the community gathered in such numbers for one of their own. Police officers from 3 counties formed honor guards in crisp dress uniforms, their badges shrouded in black crepe that fluttered in the autumn breeze. Grace walked between Chief Harrison and her sister Martha, their arms supporting her weight when her knees threatened to buckle at the sight of the flag-draped casket suspended over the open grave. Pastor Williams spoke of sacrifice and service, his familiar voice carrying across the assembled crowd as he read from Psalms about walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Grace heard the words through a haze of grief, her attention drawn instead to Duke's increasingly agitated behavior as they approached the graveside. The dog strained against his leash, whimpering in a pattern that seemed almost musical. 3 short sounds followed by 3 long ones, then 3 short again. Veterans in the crowd recognized the rhythm immediately. "That's SOS," whispered retired Navy Chief Walter Murphy to his wife. "That dog's trying to tell us something." The ceremony proceeded with solemn dignity as the honor guard folded the American flag with practiced precision, each crease a testament to lives spent in service. Grace accepted the triangle of stars and stripes with trembling hands, pressing it against her chest as the police chaplain spoke about greater love and ultimate sacrifice. Around them, the community of Salem stood witness to loss, their presence a bulwark against the terrible isolation of grief. As the casket began its descent into the earth, Duke exploded into action with a ferocity that caught everyone off guard. The leash snapped under his desperate lunge, and he threw himself at the grave with claws extended, tearing at the dirt with such violence that flecks of blood soon stained the fresh earth. Grace screamed his name, but the dog was beyond hearing, beyond reason, driven by some primal urgency that overrode every instinct except the need to dig. "Get that animal under control!" Dr. Stone's voice cut through the chaos, her professional composure cracking as she watched the carefully orchestrated funeral dissolve into mayhem. Several officers moved to restrain Duke, but the German shepherd fought with desperate strength, his claws finding purchase in the soft cemetery soil as he excavated with the single-minded determination of a creature possessed. The crowd pressed closer, some calling for animal control while others stood transfixed by the dog's obvious distress. Children cried as parents hurried them away from the disturbing scene, but Grace found herself frozen, watching Duke's frantic efforts with growing recognition. This wasn't grief. This was purpose. Duke was trying to reach something, someone with an urgency that spoke to every maternal instinct she possessed. "Let him work," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the commotion. When no one moved, she repeated herself louder, with the authority of a woman who had made life-and-death decisions in hospital emergency rooms. "Let him work. He knows something we don't." Groundskeeper Tom Murphy stepped forward with his shovel, initially intent on filling the grave and ending the spectacle. But as his blade struck the earth, the metallic clang that resulted sent a chill through every person present. The sound was wrong, too sharp, too immediate. Cemetery dirt didn't ring like that unless it hit something solid, something that shouldn't be there. The tapping that followed was soft at first, barely audible above the murmur of confused voices and Duke's continued digging. But as the crowd fell silent, straining to identify the source of the sound, the pattern became unmistakable. Tap, tap, tap. From below the casket, from inside the earth itself, came the desperate rhythm of someone trying to communicate from the grave. "Doctor." Stone went pale, her professional composure evaporating as she stared at the disturbed earth. "That's impossible," she whispered, but her voice carried across the silent cemetery like a confession. "I certified the death myself. I signed the papers." Grace felt her world tilt on its axis as understanding crashed over her like a physical blow. Duke's refusal to eat, his vigil at the door, his desperate excavation, none of it was grief. It was knowledge. Somehow, impossibly, Duke knew what no one else had realized. Bill Henderson wasn't dead. He was buried alive, and they were running out of time to save him. The carefully ordered world of Salem, Oregon, cracked open like an egg that Friday afternoon, spilling secrets and lies across the sacred ground of Section C, while a German shepherd with bloodied paws continued his desperate race against death itself. The silence that followed the metallic tapping stretched like a taut wire across Salem Memorial Cemetery, broken only by Duke's labored panting and the whispered prayers of those who understood the implications of what they'd just heard. Grace Henderson stood at the edge of her husband's grave, her black dress stark against the autumn landscape, as the impossible became undeniable. Somewhere beneath 6 feet of Oregon earth, Bill was alive and running out of time. Chief Harrison was the first to break the paralysis of disbelief, his radio crackling to life as he called for emergency excavation equipment. "This is Chief Harrison at Salem Memorial. I need the fire department's heavy rescue unit, paramedics, and every available officer at Section C immediately. We have a potential live burial situation." His voice carried the weight of 30 years in law enforcement, but even he struggled to process the magnitude of what they were facing. "Doctor." Stone stepped forward, her medical examiner's authority suddenly feeling like a fragile shield against the mounting scrutiny. "This is highly irregular," she insisted, addressing the growing crowd with forced professionalism. "The family has been through enough trauma. Disturbing the grave based on animal behavior and unexplained sounds is not only inappropriate, it's potentially illegal without proper court orders." Her words rang hollow against Duke's continued digging, the German shepherd's bloody paws now disappearing into a hole nearly 2 feet deep. Grace knelt beside Duke, her hands joining his paws in the dirt as maternal instinct overrode social convention. 30 years of marriage taught me to recognize my husband's touch," she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "If there's even a chance he's down there, suffering and alone, then we dig." Court orders and regulations be damned. The determination in her voice galvanized the crowd, officers and civilians alike moving forward to help clear the grave by hand. The fire department arrived within minutes, their heavy rescue equipment rumbling across the cemetery's carefully maintained lawns like mechanical beasts disturbing ancient peace. Captain Rodriguez assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every kind of emergency Salem could produce, but nothing in his 25 years of service had prepared him for the possibility of rescuing someone from their own funeral. "We'll need to stabilize the excavation as we go," he announced, directing his crew to position hydraulic supports around the growing hole. "If someone's really down there, we can't risk a cave-in." News of the unprecedented rescue attempt spread through Salem faster than wildfire, drawing crowds that swelled beyond the cemetery's capacity to contain them. Local news crews arrived with cameras and microphones, broadcasting live updates as the story captured national attention. Social media exploded with hashtags like #DukeKnows and #BuriedAlive. The viral nature of the story drawing viewers from around the world to witness Salem's desperate race against time. Duke collapsed from exhaustion after 3 hours of relentless digging, his paws raw and bleeding, his breathing labored from the sustained effort. Grace cradled his massive head in her lap, whispering words of encouragement as the veterinarian Dr. Patricia Hayes worked to clean and bandage his wounds. "He's given everything he has," Dr. Hayes said quietly, checking Duke's vital signs with growing concern. "His heart rate is dangerously elevated and he's showing signs of severe stress. He needs immediate medical attention." But Duke refused to leave the graveside, his amber eyes fixed on the excavation with unwavering intensity, even as his body betrayed the toll of his heroic efforts. Grace made the painful decision to stay with him rather than follow Bill to whatever fate awaited, understanding that Duke's sacrifice deserved witness, even as her heart tore between the two males who defined her world. The excavation revealed disturbing evidence that challenged Dr. Stone's official narrative at every turn. The casket showed signs of internal damage consistent with someone trying to break out from within, scratch marks on the interior lid that matched the pattern of desperate fingernails clawing for freedom. Oxygen measurements taken through carefully drilled holes confirmed the presence of carbon dioxide levels, indicating recent respiration, scientific proof that someone had been breathing inside the sealed container within the past several hours. As word spread through Salem's tight-knit community, residents began arriving in unprecedented numbers, bringing coffee and sandwiches for the rescue workers, blankets for Grace and Duke, and most importantly, their unwavering support for a family that had given so much to their town. Children drew pictures of Duke as a superhero, their innocent artwork capturing the community's recognition that something extraordinary was happening in their midst. The technical challenges of the rescue multiplied as they dug deeper, each foot of progress requiring careful engineering to prevent the very cave-in that could kill the person they were trying to save. Specialized listening equipment confirmed what Duke had known from the beginning. Weak but regular tapping from inside the casket, a Morse code of survival that grew fainter with each passing hour. The ticking clock of human endurance became audible to everyone present, each tap a reminder that time was the enemy they couldn't defeat through effort alone. Dr. Stone's behavior grew increasingly erratic as the evidence mounted against her official determination of death. She insisted on examining every piece of evidence personally, her professional authority allowing her access that would later prove crucial to understanding the full scope of her deception. When questioned about the possibility of misdiagnosis, she became defensive, citing her 15 years of experience and the obvious trauma injuries that would have prevented anyone from surviving the warehouse collapse. Grace found herself caught between hope and terror, the possibility of Bill's survival bringing equal measures of joy and anguish. If he was alive down there, how much had he suffered? How long had he been conscious in the darkness, listening to his own funeral, helpless to call out for rescue? The psychological trauma of such an experience seemed almost worse than death itself, yet she clung to hope with the desperation of someone who had already begun grieving and couldn't bear to lose him twice. The media circus surrounding the rescue attracted attention from forensic experts across the country, many offering their services to help solve what was being called the most unusual case in Oregon's history. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a renowned forensic pathologist from Portland, arrived to provide independent analysis of the situation, her expertise crucial in challenging Dr. Stone's medical conclusions. Premature burial cases are extremely rare in modern medicine, she explained to reporters, but they're not impossible, especially when initial examinations are conducted under stress or in less than ideal conditions. As darkness fell over Salem Memorial Cemetery, portable floodlights illuminated the rescue scene like a stage set for the most important performance of the community's collective life. The excavation had reached the casket level, requiring delicate work to create access without disturbing the structural integrity of the burial vault. Duke had rallied enough strength to move closer to the action, his nose working the air currents that rose from the deepening hole as if he could scent his partner's condition through 6 feet of earth and polished wood. The moment when rescue workers finally made contact with the casket's surface sent a collective gasp through the assembled crowd. Hundreds of people holding their breath as specially trained paramedics prepared to open what might be either a tomb or a makeshift survival chamber. Grace stood with her hands pressed to her heart, Duke leaning heavily against her legs as they prepared to learn whether their desperate faith in canine instinct had been justified or if they were about to witness the cruelest revelation imaginable. The sound of metal hinges groaning open would echo through Salem's collective memory for generations to come, marking the moment when their quiet community learned that sometimes love really is stronger than death, and that heroes sometimes have 4 legs and the unwavering loyalty to dig through hell itself to save the people they cherish most. The casket lid opened with a sound like breaking bones, revealing Bill Henderson's gaunt face illuminated by the harsh glare of emergency floodlights. His eyes, sunken and wild with dehydration, blinked against the sudden brightness, as 3 days of entombment had left him barely recognizable as the robust police officer Salem had mourned. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his uniform torn from desperate attempts to claw his way out of his premature grave, and when he tried to speak, only a raspy whisper emerged from his damaged throat. "Duke," he managed to croak, his eyes searching frantically through the crowd of faces peering down at him until they found the German shepherd's amber gaze. The dog's tail began a weak wag, his body trembling with exhaustion, but his devotion undiminished even in his own critical condition. Grace sobbed with relief and horror combined, seeing her husband alive but recognizing the terrible toll his ordeal had taken on both man and dog. Paramedic team leader Jennifer Collins had seen her share of impossible rescues in 15 years of emergency medicine, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of a conscious man being pulled from his own grave. "Sir, can you tell me your name?" she asked, following protocol even as her hands worked to establish vital signs on someone who technically didn't exist in the world above ground. Bill's pulse was thready and weak, his blood pressure dangerously low from severe dehydration that had pushed his body to the very edge of survival. "William Henderson, badge number 247, Bill whispered, his voice gaining strength as oxygen flowed through the mask Collins placed over his face. "How long was I down there? Grace, is Grace okay?" His eyes found his wife's face in the crowd, and the look that passed between them contained 30 years of love compressed into a single moment of recognition that survival was possible even in the darkest circumstances. The medical team worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize Bill before attempting to move him, their equipment creating a high-tech triage center in the middle of Salem's historic cemetery. Dr. Hayes divided her attention between the human patient and Duke, whose condition had deteriorated significantly during the rescue effort. The German shepherd's breathing was labored, his heart rate irregular, and his bloodied paws showed signs of serious infection from his desperate digging. Chief Harrison coordinated the crime scene investigation, even as medical teams worked to save both victims of what was clearly becoming a criminal case rather than a tragic accident. "Nobody leaves until we've taken statements," he announced, his authority commanding respect even as his own shock at the unprecedented situation colored his voice. The cemetery had become a maze of yellow tape and evidence markers, each piece of physical proof building a case that would challenge everything Salem thought it knew about justice and trust. Dr. Stone stood apart from the crowd, her face ashen as she watched her carefully constructed lie unravel in real time. The whispered conversations around her grew louder as people began to question how a medical examiner with 15 years of experience could have missed signs of life so obvious that a dog had detected them. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, knowing that explanations would be demanded soon and that her professional reputation was crumbling with each breath Bill Henderson took. The ambulance ride to Salem General Hospital became a race against time for both patients, with Grace torn between riding with her husband and staying with Duke as both faced uncertain futures. The decision was made for her when Duke collapsed completely, his massive frame going limp as his overstressed heart finally began to fail. "Take them both," Dr. Hayes commanded, her veterinary training telling her that the dog's condition was more critical than anyone realized. Inside the ambulance, Bill's consciousness drifted in and out as IV fluids worked to replace what 3 days of captivity had stolen from his body. During moments of clarity, his hand reached instinctively for Duke's fur, the physical connection between partners providing comfort that transcended species barriers. "He saved me," Bill whispered to Grace, his words slurred but determined. Somehow he knew. He never stopped believing. Salem General Hospital had never faced a case quite like this one, with medical staff scrambling to provide simultaneous care for both a human survivor of premature burial and a canine hero whose sacrifice had made the rescue possible. Dr. Richard Martinez, the emergency department chief, personally oversaw Bill's treatment while Dr. Hayes worked frantically to stabilize Duke in the adjacent veterinary clinic that had been hastily converted into an emergency surgery suite. The hospital corridors filled with Salem residents seeking updates on both patients, their vigil creating an atmosphere of shared anxiety that united the community in unprecedented ways. Children held handmade signs supporting Duke, while adults organized meal trains for Grace and established a fund to cover the mounting medical expenses that insurance would never touch. The story had captured hearts far beyond Oregon's borders, with donations pouring in from strangers who had been moved by the tale of loyalty that transcended death itself. Bill's recovery began immediately as proper hydration and medical care worked to reverse the damage of his ordeal. But Duke's condition remained critical. The German Shepherd had suffered what veterinary cardiologist Dr. Susan Park diagnosed as stress-induced cardiomyopathy, a potentially fatal weakening of the heart muscle caused by extreme physical and emotional trauma. "His heart literally broke from trying to save your husband," she explained to Grace with the gentle honesty that veterinary medicine demanded. As news crews broadcast updates around the clock, the questions surrounding Dr. Stone's role in the near tragedy grew more pointed and persistent. Investigators discovered inconsistencies in her official report that couldn't be explained by simple human error, patterns of behavior that suggested deliberate deception rather than professional mistake. The possibility that someone had intentionally tried to bury a living person alive sent shockwaves through a community that prided itself on trust and mutual support. Grace maintained her vigil between two hospital rooms, dividing her time between a husband who was steadily improving and a dog whose condition remained touch and go despite the best medical care available. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her that Duke's heroic rescue of Bill might cost the dog his own life, a sacrifice that seemed to embody everything noble about the bond between humans and the animals who choose to love them unconditionally. The media attention brought both blessings and curses to Salem, with reporters seeking every angle of a story that seemed too incredible to be true. National news anchors struggled to convey the emotional complexity of a situation where a medical examiner's potential malpractice had nearly resulted in one of the most horrific deaths imaginable, prevented only by a dog's unwavering faith in what humans had dismissed as impossible. Duke's surgery stretched through the night as veterinary specialists worked to repair damage that went far beyond the physical wounds visible on his paws. The stress of watching his partner presumed dead, combined with the extreme exertion of the rescue effort, had pushed his cardiovascular system beyond its limits. Grace held Bill's hand in one room while Duke fought for his life in another, the terrible mathematics of love demanding that she find ways to be present for both the males who defined her world. The dawn that broke over Salem on October 19th revealed a community forever changed by 24 hours that had tested every assumption about loyalty, sacrifice, and the nature of love itself. Duke's heart monitor showed a rhythm that remained irregular but stable, while Bill's vital signs strengthened with each hour of proper medical care. The investigation into Dr. Stone's actions had begun in earnest, but for Grace Henderson, the only questions that mattered were whether both her boys would survive the costs of their incredible devotion to each other. The veterinary intensive care unit at Salem General had never been so quiet, the usual sounds of recovery muffled by the weight of impending loss. Duke lay motionless on the steel examination table, his magnificent coat dulled by illness, and his breathing so shallow that Grace had to lean close to confirm he was still alive. Dr. Susan Park's latest examination had revealed the devastating truth. The German Shepherd's heart was failing, damaged beyond repair by the superhuman effort he'd expended to save Bill Henderson's life. The cardiomyopathy is progressing faster than we hoped, Dr. Park explained to Grace and Bill, who had insisted on being wheeled down from his own recovery room despite his weakened condition. Duke's heart muscle has been severely compromised by the stress and exertion. We can make him comfortable, but the damage is irreversible. Her words hung in the antiseptic air like a death sentence, each syllable driving home the cruel irony that Duke's greatest act of love would also be his last. Bill reached out with trembling fingers to touch Duke's head, his own recovery seeming insignificant compared to the loss of the partner who had literally dug him out of death's embrace. "He knew," Bill whispered, his voice still hoarse from his ordeal but filled with wonder at the depth of canine devotion. "Somehow he knew I was alive down there, and he never stopped believing. While everyone else was mourning me, he was trying to save me." Grace watched her husband's tears fall onto Duke's fur, understanding that she was witnessing the dissolution of a bond that had transcended the ordinary relationship between human and animal. Duke had been more than a working dog or even a beloved pet. He had been Bill's partner in the truest sense, willing to sacrifice everything for the person he'd sworn to protect. The German Shepherd's amber eyes occasionally flickered open, seeking Bill's face with the same devotion that had driven him to claw through 6 feet of earth. The news of Duke's condition spread through Salem like a second wave of grief, this one somehow more devastating than the original mourning for Bill Henderson. The community that had celebrated the miraculous rescue now faced the heartbreaking reality that their canine hero was dying from the very effort that had saved a human life. Children who had drawn pictures of Duke as a superhero now created new artwork showing him with angel wings, their innocent recognition that some heroes die in the act of heroism. Dr. Hayes worked around the clock to ease Duke's suffering. Her veterinary expertise focused on comfort rather than cure as the dog's condition deteriorated with each passing hour. The medications that might have helped his heart could also cloud his consciousness, potentially robbing him of the final moments of connection with the humans he'd devoted his life to protecting. The ethical complexity of end-of-life care for animals struck Grace with particular force, having made similar decisions for human patients during her nursing career. Salem's police department organized an honor guard outside the veterinary clinic, officers taking shifts to ensure that Duke's final hours were witnessed by the brotherhood he'd served with such distinction. Chief Harrison spoke to reporters about the K9 program's debt to Duke's sacrifice, his voice breaking as he described watching a dog demonstrate courage that surpassed human understanding. "Duke didn't think about his own safety," Harrison said, wiping away tears he didn't try to hide. "He just knew his partner was in trouble and he acted." The vigil outside Salem General grew as word spread through social media about Duke's declining condition, strangers driving from neighboring states to pay their respects to a dog whose story had captured international attention. Flowers and handwritten notes accumulated outside the hospital entrance, creating an impromptu memorial that testified to the power of Duke's example. Children's drawings mixed with formal condolences from law enforcement agencies across the country, all acknowledging that heroism sometimes comes in unexpected forms. Bill's own recovery seemed secondary to his anguish over Duke's condition, the physical trauma of his 3-day burial paling in comparison to the emotional devastation of watching his partner slip away. He insisted on spending every possible moment at Duke's side, his presence seeming to provide the only comfort that penetrated the dog's pain. When Duke's breathing became labored, Bill would speak softly about their years together, recounting cases they'd solved and lives they'd saved as a team. Grace found herself reliving every memory of Duke's integration into their family, remembering the scared rescue dog who had gradually learned to trust humans again after suffering abuse at the hands of his previous owners. Bill's patience in training Duke had been extraordinary, building a partnership based on mutual respect rather than dominance. The transformation from traumatized animal to heroic K9 officer had taken years of careful work, making Duke's final sacrifice all the more poignant. The medical equipment monitoring Duke's vital signs painted an increasingly grim picture as his heart struggled to maintain the rhythm of life. Each irregular beat registered on screens that had become the focus of Grace's attention, her nursing background allowing her to interpret the data that spelled out Duke's approaching death. The irony wasn't lost on her that she understood exactly what the monitors were telling her, knowledge that made hope impossible even as love demanded its presence. Dr. Park gathered the family for a final consultation as Duke's condition reached the point where intervention became a question of prolonging suffering rather than preserving life. "His kidneys are beginning to fail," she explained, with the gentle honesty that defined good veterinary medicine. "We can keep him alive for a few more hours, maybe a day, but he's not going to recover. The question now is whether we let nature take its course or help him pass peacefully while he's still aware of your presence." The decision that Grace and Bill faced was one that pet owners across the world understood but could never fully prepare for. Choosing the moment to say goodbye to a family member whose love had been absolute and unconditional. Duke's amber eyes still tracked their movements when he was conscious, his tail managing an occasional weak wag when Bill spoke his name. The dog's awareness made the choice both easier and harder, ensuring that he would understand their final act of love while making it impossible to pretend he was already gone. Salem's community waited outside the hospital as the Henderson family struggled with the decision that would end Duke's suffering while breaking their hearts forever. Local news crews maintained respectful distance, understanding that they were witnessing the conclusion of a story that had reminded people of the power of loyalty and sacrifice. The spontaneous memorial continued to grow, with flowers and candles creating a shrine to a dog who had proven that heroism knows no species boundaries. As evening approached on what would be Duke's final day, Grace helped Bill into the wheelchair that would take him to the veterinary clinic for their last goodbye. The husband she'd thought she'd lost forever was alive and recovering, while the dog who had made that miracle possible was preparing to make his final sacrifice. The terrible mathematics of love had demanded everything from Duke, and he had given it willingly, completely, without reservation or regret. The sunset that painted Salem's sky in shades of gold and crimson seemed fitting for a day that had brought both triumph and tragedy, hope and heartbreak, to a community that would never forget the German Shepherd who had redefined their understanding of what it meant to love without limits. Duke's story was approaching its end, but his legacy would endure in every act of selfless devotion that followed, a reminder that the greatest heroes often have 4 legs and hearts too big for their own survival. The revelation came not through dramatic confession, but through the methodical work of Detective Sarah Martinez, whose investigation into the premature burial had uncovered a trail of evidence that led directly to Dr. Margaret Stone's office. Hidden beneath years of professional competence lay a carefully constructed web of deception, motivated by a mother's grief that had curdled into something darker and more dangerous than anyone in Salem had imagined possible. The breakthrough occurred when Martinez discovered Danny Stone's arrest records from 2 years earlier, the drug possession charges that had led to his incarceration and subsequent death in county lockup. Officer Bill Henderson's signature appeared on every piece of paperwork, from the initial arrest report to the evidence inventory, painting a clear picture of the professional encounter that had set Margaret Stone's revenge in motion. The dates aligned perfectly with the beginning of subtle changes in Dr. Stone's behavior that colleagues had attributed to personal stress rather than criminal intent. Security footage from the warehouse collapse provided the smoking gun that investigators needed to unravel Dr. Stone's deception. The timestamps revealed that she had been alone with Bill's unconscious body for nearly 8 minutes before declaring him dead, more than enough time to confirm vital signs that contradicted her official pronouncement. Enhanced audio analysis captured her voice during those crucial minutes, muttering words that included Danny and justice, fragments of a monologue that revealed the true motivation behind her actions. When confronted with the evidence in Salem PD's interview room, Dr. Stone's professional composure finally cracked like ice under pressure. Detective Martinez laid out the timeline methodically, each piece of evidence building an unassailable case that left no room for denial or deflection. The medical examiner who had built her career on objective scientific analysis found herself trapped by the very documentation and procedures she had spent 15 years perfecting. "He killed my son," Margaret Stone said finally, her voice barely above a whisper as the weight of confession settled around her like a shroud. "Maybe not directly, but that arrest destroyed Danny's life. He was a good kid who made one mistake, and your precious Officer Henderson treated him like a career criminal. Danny couldn't handle jail. He was sensitive, artistic, nothing like the hardened addicts he was locked up with." The full scope of Dr. Stone's psychological journey from grief to revenge emerged through hours of careful questioning, revealing a woman whose maternal love had been twisted into something unrecognizable by loss and blame. She had watched her only child deteriorate in county lockup, visiting him weekly and witnessing his transformation from hopeful young man to broken drug addict who couldn't survive the violence of incarceration. When Danny died from an overdose in his cell, alone and forgotten by a system that processed him like cattle, Margaret Stone had found her target for justice. "I wasn't going to let him die immediately," she explained, with the clinical detachment that had served her so well in her professional life. "I wanted him to suffer first, to know what it felt like to be trapped and helpless. 3 days seemed appropriate, long enough for real desperation, but not so long that I couldn't claim it was an accident if things went wrong. I never intended for that dog to figure it out." Detective Martinez documented every detail of the confession, understanding that Salem's community would need complete truth to begin healing from this betrayal of trust. Dr. Stone's position as medical examiner had given her unique opportunities to manipulate death certificates and evidence, a sacred trust that she had violated in service of personal vendetta. The investigation would ultimately reveal 3 other suspicious cases where Dr. Stone had potentially falsified findings, though none as dramatically as Bill Henderson's premature burial. The psychological evaluation that followed Dr. Stone's arrest painted a portrait of a woman destroyed by grief and driven to extremes by a justice system she felt had failed her son. Dr. Rebecca Taylor, the court-appointed psychiatrist, found evidence of severe depression and complicated grief that had never been properly addressed after Danny's death. The isolation of Dr. Stone's work, dealing with death daily while processing her own loss, had created a toxic environment for her mental deterioration. Bill Henderson's reaction to the truth proved more complex than anyone had anticipated, his own brush with death having given him perspective on the fragility of life and the power of forgiveness. During his recorded victim impact statement, he spoke not only of his own trauma, but of understanding Margaret Stone's pain as a parent. "I arrested her son because he was breaking the law," Bill said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. "But I never wanted him to die. No parent should have to bury their child." The legal proceedings that followed revealed the extent to which grief could transform ordinary people into agents of destruction. Margaret Stone's case becoming a study in how loss could corrupt even those entrusted with society's most sacred responsibilities. Her 15-year career as medical examiner was scrutinized for other potential irregularities, though investigators found no evidence of previous criminal behavior before her son's death had triggered her psychological break. Grace Henderson surprised everyone, including herself, by visiting Margaret Stone in county lockup 3 weeks after her arrest. The conversation between the 2 women lasted nearly an hour, with Grace later describing it as necessary for her own healing process. "She's not a monster," Grace told reporters afterward. "She's a mother who lost her way in grief. That doesn't excuse what she did, but it explains it. And understanding is the first step toward forgiveness." The community of Salem struggled to process the revelation that one of their most trusted professionals had committed such a heinous act, the betrayal cutting deep into their sense of security and social order. Dr. Stone had been a fixture at community events, a respected figure whose professional competence had never been questioned until Duke's desperate digging had exposed the lie at the heart of her public persona. The trial would eventually result in Dr. Stone's conviction on charges of attempted murder and abuse of corpse, but her sentence was mitigated by psychiatric testimony about her mental state at the time of the crime. The judge acknowledged that while grief could explain her actions, it could never excuse the deliberate attempt to bury a living person alive. Margaret Stone would spend the next 15 years in prison, her medical license revoked, and her career destroyed by a mother's love that had transformed into something unrecognizable. As the truth emerged through legal proceedings and media coverage, Salem began the long process of rebuilding trust in institutions that had been shaken by Dr. Stone's betrayal. The medical examiner's office underwent complete reorganization, with new oversight procedures designed to prevent any single person from wielding unchecked authority over life and death determinations. Duke's heroic actions had exposed not only a specific crime, but systemic vulnerabilities that demanded comprehensive reform. The revelation of Dr. Stone's motives added another layer of tragedy to Duke's story. The understanding that his sacrifice had been necessary not because of accident or natural disaster, but because of deliberate human malice. His unwavering loyalty had overcome not just physical obstacles but moral corruption, proving that love could triumph even over the darkest impulses of human nature. 6 months after the day that forever changed Salem, Grace Henderson stood in the morning sunlight of her backyard, tending to the memorial garden she had planted where Duke used to chase squirrels and bury his favorite tennis balls. The roses she had chosen bloomed in shades of amber that matched the German shepherd's eyes, their fragrance carrying on the Oregon breeze like a blessing from beyond. Bill emerged from the house carrying 2 cups of coffee, his movements still careful but growing stronger with each passing day, the physical scars of his ordeal fading faster than the emotional ones. The small flower shop that Grace had opened on Salem's Main Street bore the name Duke's Garden in elegant script across its front window, fulfilling a dream that had been postponed but never abandoned during their years of careful saving and planning. The shop specialized in memorial arrangements and healing gardens, Grace's nursing background having taught her the therapeutic power of nurturing life from soil and seed. Customers came not just for flowers, but for the story behind the name, finding comfort in Grace's gentle understanding of loss and renewal. Bill had taken early retirement from the Salem Police Department, his pension supplemented by speaking engagements across the country, where he shared Duke's story with other K-9 units and law enforcement families. The trauma of his premature burial had left him with claustrophobia that made everyday spaces challenging, but he had channeled that experience into advocacy for better emergency protocols and victim support services. His message resonated with audiences who understood that heroism often came with hidden costs that extended far beyond the moment of rescue. The bronze statue that stood in Salem Memorial Cemetery's newly dedicated Heroes Garden captured Duke in mid-stride, his noble head held high and his intelligent eyes scanning the horizon for threats to those he protected. The inscription beneath read simply, K-9 Duke. He showed us that love knows no limits, words chosen by a community that had learned profound lessons about loyalty and sacrifice from a dog who refused to give up on the impossible. Children visiting the cemetery with their families would often place small toys and treats at the base of Duke's statue, their innocent offerings creating an ongoing memorial that spoke to the universal appeal of his story. Grace visited weekly, bringing fresh flowers from her shop and spending quiet moments sharing news with Duke about Bill's recovery and their slowly rebuilding life. These conversations felt natural rather than eccentric, the bond between them transcending the physical separation that death had imposed. Salem's community had rallied around the Henderson family in ways that restored faith in human goodness, organizing fundraisers that covered medical expenses and establishing the Duke Foundation to support retired K-9 officers and their ongoing care. The foundation's first recipient was a German shepherd named Rex, whose arthritis had ended his police career but whose family couldn't afford the specialized treatment that would ease his golden years. The irony of helping another dog named with royal bearing wasn't lost on Grace, who saw Duke's legacy extending beyond his own story. Dr. Margaret Stone served her sentence at the Oregon Women's Correctional Center, where she participated in grief counseling programs and worked in the facility's library. her analytical mind finding purpose in organizing resources for other inmates seeking education and rehabilitation. Letters arrived monthly from Grace Henderson, correspondence that began as angry confrontation but evolved into something approaching understanding between two women who had both lost people they loved, albeit under vastly different circumstances. The correspondence revealed Dr. Stone's gradual recognition of the magnitude of her actions, the grief counseling having helped her understand how her love for Danny had been corrupted into something destructive rather than healing. Her letters to Grace contained detailed apologies and explanations, attempts to make sense of decisions that had seemed rational in the depths of her psychological breakdown but appeared horrifying in retrospect. Grace shared selected portions of these letters with Bill, both of them working through forgiveness as an active choice rather than an automatic response. Bill's work with new K-9 units took on special meaning as he honored Duke's memory by training the next generation of police dogs and their human partners. His experience with premature burial had given him unique insights into the importance of trust between partners, understanding that the bond between human and animal could mean the difference between life and death in extreme circumstances. Young officers listened with rapt attention as he described Duke's unwavering faith, learning that partnership meant more than just following commands or completing tasks. The media attention that had initially overwhelmed Salem gradually evolved into something more manageable, with Duke's story becoming part of the broader conversation about animal intelligence and the bonds between humans and their working companions. Documentary filmmakers and authors approached the Henderson family regularly, seeking permission to tell Duke's story to wider audiences. But Grace and Bill remained selective about which projects honored Duke's memory appropriately rather than simply exploiting it for entertainment value. Grace found unexpected purpose in counseling other families who had lost police K-9 partners, her combination of nursing background and personal experience making her uniquely qualified to help people navigate grief that others might not fully understand. The loss of a working dog carried complexities that civilian pet loss didn't encompass, the professional partnership adding layers of meaning that required specialized support. Her work grew into a consulting practice that served law enforcement agencies across the Pacific Northwest. The house on Cherry Avenue underwent subtle changes as Bill and Grace adapted to life without Duke's constant presence. The silence where his breathing and movement used to provide comfort now filled with different routines and new sources of meaning. They had decided against getting another dog immediately, understanding that Duke's relationship with them had been unique rather than replaceable, though they left open the possibility that another rescue animal might eventually find its way into their hearts. Salem's transformation extended beyond the Henderson family to encompass changes in emergency protocols, medical examiner oversight, and community awareness of mental health resources. Dr. Stone's case had exposed vulnerabilities in systems that residents had trusted implicitly, leading to reforms that made similar tragedies less likely while preserving the efficiency of emergency services. The City Council established annual mental health awareness days, recognizing that grief and trauma could affect anyone, including those in positions of public trust. The anniversary of Duke's heroic rescue became an annual celebration of service animals throughout Oregon, with ceremonies honoring working dogs who had made ultimate sacrifices for their human partners. Bill spoke at the first commemoration, his voice steady as he described Duke's final act of loyalty and the lessons that emerged from tragedy. The audience included K-9 officers and their partners from dozens of agencies, all understanding that they were honoring not just one exceptional dog, but the entire tradition of partnership between humans and animals. Grace's evening routine included reading Duke's story to visitors at the local children's hospital, where young patients found hope in tales of loyalty that transcended death itself. The book she had written about their experience, with proceeds supporting the Duke Foundation, became a bestseller that introduced Duke's legacy to readers around the world who needed reminders about the power of unwavering love. Children would ask if Duke was watching from heaven, and Grace would answer honestly that love like his never really ended. The sunsets over Salem's Willamette Valley seemed more beautiful now, Grace and Bill often watching them from their back porch while sharing quiet conversation about the day's events and their plans for tomorrow. These moments carried special significance, reminders that ordinary time together was a gift that Duke's sacrifice had preserved. They spoke of him often, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with the warm gratitude of people who had been touched by something extraordinary. As evening settled over their memorial garden, Grace and Bill found peace in knowing that Duke's story continued to inspire others toward greater loyalty, deeper love, and unwavering faith in the bonds that connect all living beings. His legacy lived not just in bronze statues and flower shops, but in every act of devotion that his example encouraged, proving that heroes never truly die as long as their stories continue to change hearts and save lives. To our cherished friends who understand that life's greatest treasures often come with 4 legs and unconditional hearts, Duke's story reminds us that love never truly ends, it simply transforms into something even more powerful. Like many of you who have experienced the profound bond with a faithful companion, Grace and Bill discovered that the deepest connections transcend physical presence. Duke's unwavering loyalty mirrors the devotion you've shared with your own beloved pets, those silent guardians who knew your moods, comforted your sorrows, and celebrated your joys without asking for anything in return except your love. His sacrifice teaches us that heroism isn't always found in grand gestures, but in the quiet faithfulness of showing up every single day. For those of you navigating the golden years, perhaps missing a cherished companion or feeling uncertain about tomorrow's challenges, Duke's legacy offers hope. That love multiplies rather than diminishes, that purpose can be found in unexpected places, and that the bonds we forge with loyal hearts, whether human or animal, create ripples of goodness that extend far beyond our own lives. In a world that often feels disconnected, Duke reminds us that authentic love still exists, still saves lives, and still makes every ordinary day extraordinary. Share with us what faithful companion changed your life in ways you never expected. How do you honor the memory of a beloved pet who showed you what unconditional love truly means?